question in either French or English. Alors, je passe en français, je me présente, je suis...
Let me shift to French. I'm Claude Nemetsky. I am an Togolese entrepreneur living for many a year in New York, but I'm also a French citizen, and it's a very, very honor for me to host two eminent personalities with whom I have been able to exchange several times in the past. And I would like and call on Mr. Hubert Védrine, the president of the François Mitterrand Institute and former Minister of Foreign Affairs of France.
Et aussi...
Also,
Monsieur
Mr. André Azoulay, who is His Majesty the King's counselor, His Majesty the King of Morocco. And we are going to discuss subjects relating to globalization, fragmentation, and the role that France and Morocco can play in these major geopolitical, economy, and societal subjects. We'll start with you, Mr. Védrine, because it's an important week for the French-Moroccan relations. The whole world has watched the France-Morocco football match of the day before yesterday, and of course, we can, of course, oppose the French's bliss to the very disappointment of Moroccans. But here, there has been a real tension. There is a real tension today between France and Morocco. I would even go the extra mile and say that some young persons here in Morocco with whom I've been exchanging are telling me that they are being much more oriented to the Anglo-Saxon spheres. They would prefer to learn English than live through the post-colonial heritage of the Francophonie. I'd like have you thought about the tensions that exist today between the Moroccans and the French and the Moroccans, not only sports-wise? Well, true is the fact that the globalization, of course, has reshuffled the cards for everyone, both for Morocco and France. But even before saying that, we'd have to remind ourselves that history on the long run between France and Morocco is exceptional. Morocco is a very, very millennial country, France likewise, and for many a reason there has been the colonial active phase of Europe, and at a certain time Morocco was weakened from a sovereignty standpoint. There has been a protectorate that lasted 4 decades. It could have led to a detestation, which was not the case. But now we are many decades on after independence with 3 successive sovereigns, during which these 3 decades, of course, a very different relations between the social classes, the middle classes. Everyone knows that. No need, of course, to elaborate that. But I'm repeating the word unique. But it's a kind of treasure here. Of course, there have been crises here and there. There have been recent tensions. We hope that it's going to be soon overcome. In the last 2 cases, it was overcome. I'm not talking about the political relationships between managers. I'm talking about the deep-rooted societal in all fields. It will also be overcome eventually, but still, albeit in this era of globalization, we have, of course, new choices, new constraints, but also new choices. But for France, there's not only Morocco. For Morocco, there's not only France. So this is not something new, you're telling me, and we're saying here. But isn't there here in this globalized context, a globalization which is not anymore what has been, which will never, which has been an Americano globalization, which piecemeal, conflictual, competitive, etc. Are there not things that are formidable to be undertaken between the country? I think I'm really confident on that, but really first have to fathom it, to devise it. We should not only forget, we shouldn't we shouldn't lose sight of the treasure that we have had in the past. But of course, now to project ourselves in the chaotic magma of the world topics, definitely, in my opinion, there are fields in which Morocco and France are exactly the adequate partners. And at a certain time, in any case, there would be a better controlling of the migration flows between Morocco and France, and not only with respect to the migration, transit, etc. For the decades to come, we need to revisit these. Of course, this being said, the social networks and the media have talked a lot and have given the floor to the Moroccans who have been ousted, who have been sent back to Morocco, whereas they had very strong relations and bonds. Some of them have studied in Morocco and in France, so much so that the Quai d'Orsay has called for the creation of a new media with short videos that show positive information about France to the destination of both French and Moroccan. You were at that time, of course, the head of the Quai d'Orsay. And did you ever think that France could finance a positive soft power through the media to to create for France a better, of course? So. The language, the gastronomy, we have a lot of things here. No, the recent crisis pertaining to the fact that some countries never, of course, accept again for the 10th time those who have been, no, I'm not talking about those who have been condemned, those who have studied in France who can't have any more visa. Now the consequences from the French side, tightening visa and tightening the vice, I think we're coming out of that crisis. We will see that in the coming days. We're going to really come out from this episode. I have many indications there too. But it has revealed, all of these protestations have revealed a visceral or very profound interpretation between the societies of France and Morocco. And I'm telling you, of course, there's no other ones who are. These are strong, very elements that we would be able to embark upon. Of course, we're not going to stay in this crisis forever. We have to project ourselves in the medium term. What are we going to do which is novel, useful, and intelligent between the two countries in the midst of this chaotic globalization in which we are now living? And I think many things should be. So I'll come back to my earlier topic by putting forth the assumption whereby at this very moment, which is difficult with respect to visa management, is going certainly to be overcome. Mr. Azoulay, we've already talked again and again on these very topics, but here I would like to talk about the Special Commission's report that have appeared in April 2021, which set up the new development model for Morocco, a roadmap, which is a remarkable document, and I only yesterday read it, 170 pages, and I would like to thank my friend Osman Diaye, who runs TV5 for Morocco, who's recommended me to read this report before the intervention. I think this is remarkable what you have been able to sketch out, to map out as a horizon for Morocco between now and 2035. Page 151 is consecrated to the digital, and whereby, of course, we want to reestablish the trust between the state, the company, the corporate world, and the citizens. I know we are reading it differently. What has marked me here when I was reading the report is the fact that we're talking about solidarity between the Maghreb countries, between the Arab Muslim spaces, between the Africans of the continent, and we're not much talk and historical bond between France and Morocco in this report. How do you go to explain that? Well, before trying and explain, first I would like to commend you for having read it and invited all those who are here in the room to really follow suit and read the document. This is a document which certainly takes stock of what Morocco is in December 2022, but mostly projects itself on a medium and long term, both rationally, experts-based and scientific-based, which is a very good reading. This is a very good read. I'm talking about the report. Now, the fear that you have mentioned, well, I would say, if you allow me, I'll talk about it a little later. But here, I would like to first thank Karim Al-Ainawi for the invitation here at this moment, and I would not have missed, I would be amiss if I did not mention 2 or 3 things that have struck me since we ever set foot here in your room. Of course, this dominating trend and more present tendency in the earlier panels to talk about crisis. Pessimism. There were some, of course, silver linings, but rather everyone was saying, of course, it's ill-faring, and it's not really a good situation that we're going through. No. In my country, about my country, I can tell you, of course, I don't use generally I use superlatives when I talk about Morocco, but here I would say that there is a reality that I would like to share with you. And please, don't hesitate to cut me when I've been a little too long. Of course, impassionate, I am, with an almost activist approach, which I adopted when I heard, and I was talking about that to Hubert Vedrine a moment ago, of what has been mentioned, not on the social channels and networks. That's another story, but on other French institutional TV channels, rather experts in what they say and voice out. But what has been mentioned and what has been told within the framework of the football, talking about Morocco, of course, has saddened me, disheartened me, of course. How can we really say that and hear that? Of course, if you allow me, I'm going to say where we are today, where we are at today. Well, let me first underscore that this in post-globalization community of nations, a community of nations which is, of course, in quest for benchmarks. So this is the possibility of you and I living together, possibly that we respect one another, and even that we build or co-build ourselves together. There is such a regression, so much archaism, coming back to the nationalisms, I use the plural, in this culture of denial and fracture. Of course, this is very, very saddening. And I would have liked to hear that in this land of Islam, in this Arabic, Berber, Jew, which is Moroccan, which is that of diversity, there is an experience that may be of interest, of course, to start giving the beginning of the answer to these fears that are nascent. Morocco is not really going well to please the others. Morocco was fortunate enough since quite a long time ago to really be able to make the analysis, was fortunate enough to make the right choices and to attend to it, that not necessarily the best endowed resource-wise and commodities-wise country, that there is a resilience, coherence, consistency, governance, stability, leadership that have imposed a societal model that is now paying off and working well because it has managed to find and use the resilience. And I think the quality of making the adequate, appropriate choices, so much so that I'm not going to give you the whole list of the analysis of the last 5 decades. But let's talk about the most recent crisis, that of 2008, those that have ensued, COVID, etc. All of the fractures, all of the hits, all of the shocks that we have borne the brunt of. The Moroccan response, I'm Moroccan, I'm not going to say the contrary, but there are also Moroccan voices that do not really gauge exactly what we have done, but the way in which we have managed all of such crises, the way in which we have come out of them, the way in which we project ourselves in the 3 decades to come really is very reassuring. It is in Africa and in the land of Islam, it is in Morocco, in the Maghreb, and in North Africa. And it's working well, and it's all I would have to add when we see the fundamentals in the economy, of course, the harnessing, the mastery of such crises. I'm not going to say that we are the A-League, but we have really withstood. We have shouldered the situation, and we have overcome. We will be able, of course, to do even more in mastering our deficit. But if you read the IMF's report, the World Bank's report of all the institutions, if you see the rankings and the ratings of the Fitch and the like, and Moody, etc., the Moroccans, the Moroccan who I am is being assured, not to say I am really taking pride in being Moroccan. The choices that we've made, inclusion-wise and social cohesion. Let me, in passing, mention what has taken place in generalized coverage of the social insurance to the widest chunk and walks of my nationals, Moroccan nationals. Of course, we're not being rich. We are not always identified as being the country that is most wishing, of course, to reach social balance. Albeit the Moroccan reality is not only exemplary in the region, which is ours, which is mine, but of course we'd like and see what happens in the other side of the Mediterranean to capitalize thereon, to also do the likewise elsewhere, what we've done here in Morocco. I mean, hence there's this economic and financial reality which is essential, because if we fail in that, we wouldn't have been able to do it. And otherwise, it wouldn't be credible. Social inclusion, it's impressive. Impressive. Gender, the place, the empowerment of women, where certainly we have a long way to go still. But when we see what we have, where we are, compared to 30, 20, 40 years ago, there's a dynamic for me which is certainly rejuvenating, reinvigorating. Let me now touch back on the main question. Does Morocco still need France to build its new development model? But we have never been in good relations with Morocco because we needed it. No, France also does need us. But we are together in this equation. Yeah, well, when I visited the Mohammed VI Polytechnic University, Ben Gurion located school, and the students to whom I talked, of course, they wanted to go to MIT in the US. There were very few wanted. Well, I meet a lot of French, but I'm also quite often in France, and I find the same willingness, concern to go in all of the universities the world for. And
there is a reality of the Moroccan society, and once again, I don't wish to reiterate this issue, but this football competition has revealed something quite interesting. Did you see this youth? Did you see this reappropriation of the identity, of the nationality, of this capacity of being collectively Moroccan, regardless of the social status, regardless of the generation, regardless of the diversity, which is also the wealth of my country? It is absolutely fascinating. It has not always been the case. May I also add another point, because I was watching on a French channel with a program that shocked me, to say how Morocco is expressing itself and how Morocco is misunderstood. It wasn't a journalist, but a personality was saying, well, did you see the Moroccan football team after its victory, after Croatia, with the Palestinian flag? And so what? Said, well, did you realize these Moroccans that are telling us that between Jews and Muslims, because everything's confounded in Israel, everyone's blending everything together. There's this standardization between Morocco and Israel, and we're saying, well, we were being told stories, well, the Moroccan football players will display the Palestinian flag. What an insult to the most primary intelligence. What I retain is that in the streets of Gaza, in Ramallah, everywhere else in Palestine, we had the Moroccan flag that was paraded. And it is not the standardization with the State of Israel that prevented Palestinians from displaying the Moroccan flag. And to express their attachment to Morocco, we could have said, well, these Moroccans are displaying the Palestinian flag, and they are pushing forward in a different relationship with Israelis to give a full chance to what will be imposed one day, but which has always been our this two-state solution living together. And so it was interpreted the wrong way, and the same applies to everything else. So we can say that, well, 1 or 2, 3 television programs, I mean, okay, well, life goes on. Well, no. It is not simply social networks, and it is actually revealing of our incapacity as Moroccans to explain what we are. Maybe so, but there's also this interpretation which, to me, seems so remote from the realities that we are experiencing. This is why I'm insisting so much on this point. I believe that we need to change the software. Please allow me to conclude. Today, around us, in the north, in the south, there's this sort of failure. Maybe it is that of globalization, maybe it is that of fragmentation, regardless. But we are going backwards. There's such a philosophical and moral archaism in this incapacity of handling or managing or of living our differences. And today, online, it is becoming some sort of challenge, a daily challenge. It's not simply migration issues, Hubert, if you'll allow me. It's simply the fact that in our societies, at minimum, we are continuing to live together as we did 30, 40, 50 years ago, but it is no longer the case. And I see in my life, in my country, I mean, there's no magic wand. But there was a sort of momentum that was triggered, which resulted in the fact that diversity is at the heart of social relations in Morocco, whereas was lost elsewhere, fractured elsewhere, contested, and has become confrontational and conflictual. And in Morocco, we turned this into a source of wealth. We turned this into a brand. We did not invent it. I mean, when I speak of Morocco, I speak about the Moroccan civilization. I'm 3,000 years old, and I know what my history has taught me, what my history has left with me. And we're reaping the benefits today, and this is something that we are embodying with such a strength and such a truth, which is not the top down, the one that we see top down, because often in France, well, we say, oh, well, it comes from up there when we talk about Morocco. But the streets, just like the flag, nobody understood. I mean, for some time, for about several decades, there's this grassroots level, there's grassroots momentum. And so there's this seems of conjunction between the top down and bottom up. And I will conclude on that time. I mean, I apologize, Hubert, for taking up your speaking time. And less than a month ago, and I repeat this because it is so symbolic, in Essaouira, my native city, there was a meeting that we've been organizing for 18 years. It's a cultural event, and 18,000 people came together. 99% of them were Muslims and Jews that came, and thousands of Jews that came from all around the world, from Israel and the rest of the world, Muslims from all around the world, from Morocco, but also elsewhere, simply for the pure joy of being together. Where else is that possible today? No longer in Paris, no longer in New York, no longer in London, not even in Tel Aviv. And it works. This is what Morocco is about. And all of the narratives have their place, even those that disagree. And it is because of this narration of the difference and this analysis that is not always consensual. This is what makes up this reality. And if you allow me, this capacity of Morocco, where this is where everything is possible, and this is where it's disappeared elsewhere. This is an absolutely essential topic, and thank you so much for shedding this light, Mr. Azoulay. Before asking my question to Mr. Védrine and before opening up the debate with the room, well, the day before yesterday, I was very much astonished to see that other French citizens, such as myself, from African origin, were supporting the Moroccan team and not the French team. And the reason why is that, given I grew up in France, and I often felt rejected by the French Republic because all citizens were asking me, well, where are you from? And the question I'd like to ask you, Mr. Védrine, is that if we were to compare François Mitterrand's France to that of Emmanuel Macron and the direct relationship between Morocco and the relationship between Morocco and Africa, what would be the difference in the diplomatic approach and the economic diplomacy, social diplomacy, etc.? Because maybe you're the person that is the best positioned to answer this question. I will not embark on a comparison of times by breaking this up into presidents. I mean, there are other paces that will try to, especially generations, I might add. I saw the room's reaction. Morocco isn't perceived in this way. So if you applauded, is that you are relieved to hear this presentation, and I agree. I fully agree with what Mr. André Azoulay said, and with the Morocco's achievements on many respects. And it is not necessarily known that way. I mean, not in France at least. And in France today, for many other reasons, because French people are concerned by many things. There's European issues that are absorbing everything, and we have said way too often that the solutions are only European. They're essentially European, but not only, so sort of eaten away at the available portion of the brain to measure this Moroccan trajectory over the past decades and recently. So it's extremely important, and it's important for André Azoulay to also speak on French media to say this, to say what Morocco of today is. And that's part of the solution to the problem. And what was also mentioned is the attractiveness of the United States. This is obvious. This is nothing new. I invented the expression hyperpower 30 years ago. This is nothing new. And for those that absolutely wish to go to the U.S., well, they will also want to go to China once they'll have overcome their COVID issues. And there's also, I mean, it's not anecdotic. I mean, it's not secondary. It's not simply ridiculous. But this is very serious, because in the currents of the different currents that mobilized and that have become enraged, there's also this anti-rationalist current, anti-light, anti-science. And this is a major challenge for American higher education, and you'll see that the same people who will go to the U.S. I mean, you will repent a few years ago. They will want to go elsewhere. So, but the reality is that there's a new president of Harvard that was appointed yesterday, who's African American, who's Haitian now. There's a president of MIT that didn't speak one word of English. So I'm not talking about this battle between religions. The Philip Roth's book showing that what we can become. You mean are you talking about the book The Task? It was published 30 years ago. I mean, it was. It's really left a great impact. So I don't think it's cautious. It wouldn't be cautious today to say to only focus on American higher education, given that there's no defense with respect to that. There are many reactions in different spheres that are organized. There are some universities that remain structured on a very Protestant or Jewish or Catholic avenues, but what I'm trying to say here is that attractiveness on the first level is not an end in and of itself, but in globalization, even if there are some dominant trends, and I was talking about this American globalization and the 40 countries in the world that represent 60% of humanity, they didn't wish to split between the Putin and the Western world. I mean, there are many currents. I mean, you can hear what the Indians are saying too, and the Indian nationalists that are in power. They're saying that India will be the superpower after, and that the fundamental values of India will be spread throughout the entire world. Well, so it's not so simple. It's not 20 or 30 years ago where we can simply be fascinated by the American success, given that it's a country that's very much split. And with respect to India, when we see that the head of Microsoft and Google are Indian, and they succeeded in the U.S. and not in France, well, there are many other examples in France too. But this is not the angle that I'm approaching the subject. I don't think it's a way to maybe answer constructively on this notion of this relationship between France and Morocco. There are many reasons, even in this world. From Morocco's standpoint, as it's been recalled by André, and even France that's involved, I mean, in Europe with the positions with Germany, etc. I mean, there are many reasons for which there's, I mean, since 2020, 2030, there's this partnership between Morocco and France in different areas. There's education, languages, culture. There's also economic projects, ecological projects, this ecologization of industrial activities. There's really many opportunities. Not everything will be absorbed by the relationship with the U.S. Otherwise, no, there's not only the U.S., there's China, Turkey, I've only given examples of people that absolutely wish to go to the U.S. because I was sharing my personal experience here in Morocco with the youth that I work with. But that's not all. I mean, what I recalled at first is the unprecedented relationship over several decades, which concerns hundreds and thousands of people from each side. I mean, for both countries. And I think this is indestructible, except if we are very gauche. But if we are able to transform this asset and reproject it in positive outlooks of the future, I gave you some indications, but there are many. I believe that we have a bright future ahead of us, and if Morocco, which has been led intelligently and enlightenedly, I mean, I don't think that Morocco will ever all place all of its eggs in the American basket, even for its elite. I mean, there's some that well, maybe it's better to go to Harvard than in Paris. We'll see, but I'm sure that others might go to India, and that's great. But what I'm expecting is to see is if Morocco continues to be as savvy as what André has presented to play this role. It's not binary. It's not this or that. I believe that there are many arguments on one hand or the other, except that we can no longer function based on this on legacy or asset that's just convenient. I mean, we need to reinvent things, and we need to see. I mean, depending on there are many fields, so we need to see what, for instance, the cultural field. If you see the appeal of Morocco today, the number of people, including France, that come to establish French people that come to establish themselves in Morocco. We were discussing it earlier with André and Essaouira, but these ties remain extremely strong. So we will not only base ourselves on the impression of a small portion of elite with respect to what's dominating the world of the future. I mean, it's with the globalization of the future, well, is really unclear. I mean, how that will be shaped. There's so many. I mean, it's so obscene financially, etc. I mean, it causes all sorts of strife. So it's really this sort of fight. So a country like France has many assets, except that the French are depressed, but they are also disabled by their pessimism. They're pessimists due to their disability. So that's a French characteristic. That's just there's nothing we can do about it. And I'm not sure that Moroccans all share this extremely positive dynamic and this seductive presentation of André. Well, we'll ask the audience. It's a great segue. So just regarding what Hubert said, and I fully concur, in addition to the students that you've met with, please note that the biggest contingent of applicants to Polytechnique and Pont-et-Chaussée and other schools in France are Moroccan. And it is not simply this year. It has always been the case. They are graduates of the Polytechnique, but they're not heads of companies from the CAC 40. I mean, CAC 40. I mean, well, I don't know if they went to Polytechnique to work for companies in the CAC 40. There are other indicators than the CAC 40. I mean, that embody excellence of their academic experience in France. I mean, it's not only the alpha and omega that allows to analyze and understand and to project ourselves into the future, but it's important to take into account the fact that today this reality is imposed upon us. At least objectively, it is as significant as the students that you've met with. And I'm saying this, and this is a constant for 10, 15, 20 years ago, and it has never changed. I had promised that we'd give the floor to the room. Just a slight nuance. I don't wish for my perspective to be considered as idealistic. We are aware of our failures. We are aware of where we've gone amiss, and we know where we can also find solutions and replace the cursor in the right direction. We're definitely not trying to say that everything's all rosy and everything's perfect. Absolutely not. So we have a question on this side of the room. So if you could kindly introduce yourself before asking your question, that would be very helpful. Thank you. And do we have a microphone here?
Ah oui, d'accord, super.
Bonjour.
Well, good morning. Hamza, co-founder of a Morocco-based company operating in the technology field. Let me now concur with the moderator myself. On my personal path, I have grown in Morocco, and I also studied at the Henri IV High School, and I went to France after that. Of course, today there is a real mistrust, loss of trust between Morocco and France. Being myself binational, I belong to the country, I embody, I epitomize, of course, this principle. And I think there are in three aspects. First, of course, we are being, of course, irritated, but by what we can read on the media. Of course, it is, again, in Le Monde, very respected, with a readership, of course, writing articles that are really totally non-commensurate with the reality that we're living through. Sometimes, of course, France maybe has started to see Morocco differently from it has always done with respect to its rapport and the relations with the North, the South. So much so, of course, the Morocco and France couple can and is certainly essential for the reason. And thirdly, I would say there are a lot of effective announcement, a lot of discourse, a lot of sentimentalism, and not much reality actions behind the acts. And the last presidency is much more in the talk without walk. So to the cultural and politically speaking, there's a lot of also problems. And I don't pretend to represent here anyone. It's only a feeling, my gut's feeling. And we are being recruited today, of course. People speak to it in English. They prefer to speak. And of course, there is a way of misappropriation of the French, and which is, of course, a pity given all of the assets and the capitalization potential. I want also to table the following question to Mr. Hubert-Vedrine and ask you what causes today the blindness of the French elite with respect to the Moroccan-French partnership as to the reality of the Sahara, which is a Moroccan Sahara, and of course, so France on postures and stances that are not incomprehensible, of course, to this is not willing, of course, to make the step that many international administrations have already taken. Thank you.
Très bonne question.
Very good. Judicious question. Not really a question, it's a general statement, but which is ended on a question. Interesting, yes, it is. First, of course, you're not obliged to read Le Monde. Yeah, Le Monde is it's not anymore a reference newspaper. It's not an activist, and you can read the Le Monde, but not necessarily read the articles on Le Monde. So this is a very good recommendation for your tranquility, and it does not represent the general opinion. But on the Sahara, you're not very fair. You're even unjust. For the last 20 years, France has protected the interests of Morocco, and not the only one, by the way, which did it. And it's not because there has been a really Trump-led actions that some countries have positioned themselves in a much more favorable position that it should, of course, cause us to lose sight of this diplomatic improvement. It can rebound. You cannot say that France or leave it to be understood that France is a hostile country because there's the UN, the influence of Algeria, etc. Of course, France has a lot of merit with respect to that. Otherwise, these are remarks that would lead us to segue us to other questions that we've heard. But I think it remains open to discussion, and even at a certain time, in the minds of some young Moroccans, of course, who want to feel more globalized at best, of course, the same, maybe in 5 years' time, they're going to be talking Mandarin, but it's going to prove a mistake. Indians, it's not because there are remarkable Indians who believed in the Second Valley or in England or the city, of course. There is also the viceroy of the Indians who were British, and now, of course, we have the premier who is Indian, but it doesn't change any one iota of the policy of Moody. Of course, he doesn't want to pretend, of course, to continue when, or the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who theorizes the ambition of India to be the #1. Of course, this is peanuts. It is rather the influence of India. We shouldn't be too high-percented, but let's remain in Morocco. And I would like to now recognize the floor to a former Minister of Justice, Mrs. Guigou of France, who wanted to table the following question. For starters, the current state of the relations between France and Morocco, of course, is very saddening and disheartening for me, and I'm really very grateful to André Hubert to talk to and listen to the young generations. And I also appreciate and understand that the young generations whom you are representing, who has bonds with friends that you have recalled in passing, is willing to see something else. This is the youth. When we're young, we are impatient. We don't want to be imprisoned in what has been existing for some too long a time now. But at the same time, it seems to me that we really have to, the oldest ones and the gray-haired ones and the younger, we have to really measure the treasure that the relation between Morocco is an exceptional relation. I would share and concur with the analysis and the remarks of André in Morocco. Of course, we didn't have the same path, but this is a country that has made wondrous progress and remarkable advancements, and for having been able to manage and to come out from one of them quite serious bilateral crisis, which was induced by a real impair, and that could have been avoided. I can say that what is important to really take the right measure of what has been done and to replace Morocco's evolution in the perspective and the evolution of the France-Morocco relationship in a historical perspective. And by so doing, Hubert has just recalled us that on the Sahara, of course, I fully concur with this analysis. If and when we would be doing that, we would be having a possibility, and I hope that we'll do it, to really together project ourselves in the world that is common. And this is what we should do. And here, I'd like and ask the panelists about the possibility for both France and Morocco to bring the European Union to look closer into, of course, to be south-bound, to be much more oriented towards the south. Of course, on the European Union, Hubert and myself do not necessarily share the same opinion, but albeit we talk about that a lot, and we concur on the very fact that Europe is led necessarily by history and geography to really polarize a little too much on its east. The Ukraine war has exacerbated that, and that is understandable, but it shouldn't impede the European Union to saying, well, finally, we also have neighbors to the south who are also undergoing the brunt of crises, which are very serious. What can we do, therefore? I think the migratory case is very important. My personal opinion is what I have, and please tell me if you concur with me. I am of the opinion that if our managers decide that France and Morocco together try to control these phenomena, because in the reciprocal interest of everyone, we have to curb them. The African countries should not be doomed forever to lose their elites, to go elsewhere. We need definitely, of course, to develop Africa. Now, in this case, is there any possibility? Recently, Hubert has been skeptical about this possibility. I am a little more optimistic. I'd like to know what André Azoulay and Hubert Védrine have also think of my very question. Thank you. André. Well, please, you first. With Elizabeth Guigou, we have been caressing the same dreams, and I would like to widen the perimeter or the scope. What is now occurring in terms of management of crisis and migration? Here also we are regressing. We are constantly in a crisis containment logic, and Europe only shows up when there are fatalities and when there are a lot of corpses on the Spanish coastline, and when there is also wetbacks in the Mediterranean. But Elizabeth, let me remind you that 30 years ago, the Barcelona process has been initiated. You would recollect. And it's been launched in the aftermath of, or in the continuation of the historical Casablanca Committee that has made all of the ambitions and hopes possible, including pertaining to the Israel and Palestine conflict, but also as a reaction, because the Americans also, starting from that conference, have conceptualized what has become familiar and popular for those who follow the situation, the MENA zone. It did not exist before the Casablanca summit. And I still recollect vividly that Europeans have said, well, the Europeans are walking on our turf land. Now, they're proposing us something and hitherto not existed, and it was, of course, the chasse gardée of France and Spain and other European states. But there's been the Barcelona process. The Barcelona process, in its very preamble, in its first witnesses, the agreement has given an answer to all and everything to which we are today confronted, up to including migration-wise. And the Barcelona process has had the virtue, the political far-sightedness, but unfortunately it has been spoiled. That meeting hasn't been followed upon. And in what has been sketched out or fleshed out in the Mediterranean, it's not because us Moroccans, for example, wanted to adhere to Europe and many other countries in the southern Mediterranean, but we have created a concentric circles that would set up the rules of the game of the space in which together we could evolve without necessarily being part of the EU or the European Union. Now, that's the rule of the game. I recollect back when I mentioned, if my children ask me, or children of Moroccan parents would say, many would say, what would their future be tomorrow in their relations with France, Spain, etc., etc., what could they of it? What could they do of it? And we have designed even this circles that are concentric around the European node in terms of migration, in terms of economic cooperation, in terms of cultural cooperation, with regard to optimization of what could already be back then the relations between the southern Mediterranean and the north thereof. And as you, Elizabeth, we have been part of these Euro-Mediterranean institution on one day and advancing or coming back according to the differences, of course. And Morocco has been a good student for the European Union. But all these very situations, it's a zero-sum game. We have botched all of the possibilities. There has always been a good reason for this product to be sent back to calendar days. And one day it's the crisis in Europe. Another way, of course, is the Eastern Mediterranean. We have to establish things and stabilize things. Another day it's a crisis to the east of Europe. And it's been constantly that way. So much so that today, what really made up the consistent, credible, legitimate, acceptable note of both sides of the Mediterranean has gone out of the European radars. Who now is talking? Tell me, who's now is talking about this major Euro-Mediterranean project that could have, if it had existed, to absorb, to dampen, to manage, to optimize, and to capitalize on these rules of the game that are really lacking, direly lacking. We are direly lacking. As a matter of fact, France and Morocco can be the wake-up callers, the one who would ring the alarm bell, whereby, of course, we'll have to be able to, of course, do better migratory flow management, rather than managing drama, crisis, and to shelter in the answer of the moment on a dossier, on a situation that would be better left for the day after tomorrow. So I'd like to ask a question, but Mr. Vadrine, maybe you could react? No, we have by far encroached upon the time that we have now. Can you hear me? Not very. Let me start where, yeah, sound is better. I'm starting from Elizabeth Guigou's remark on how to attract the interest of institutions of Europe onto the South. It seems to me all the more important. I don't have the same stance as Elizabeth on the degree of integration, because the European people do not want additional integration, but they would be very happy if the Europeans have the clout, of course, to make things now in the current state of things. And thanks to the apparent situation caused by Putin, of course, it's the time that has rephagocyted Europe. Let me elaborate on that. I think for the time being, we have to really relinquish all of the discord, which is, of course, petrified. But there's no more important. But it makes the idea of saying Europe is not an anti-Russia Europe discourse. What the Polish want the Polish for reasons that there are theirs, and not only so, of course, there's the dimension of the South, but that dimension of and from the South. It's very important, but it's not working well. It does not work well if we don't find a sturdy, acceptable, long-lasting solution to the to controlling the migratory flows. Let me come back to an agreement. Of course, we will have to start between the transit and quota per business, per trade line, and then, of course, this quota should be made available to the gigantic, of course, business in Africa, which, according to the UN, of course, brings more money than drug with an organized system that includes women and men in ships, and also whistleblowing them to the authorities in Spain or Italy. Otherwise, of course, there would be right of asylum in Europe in 10 years from now. And of course, there is a meeting quota per occupation, but over time, of course, people, of course, going to not to really anymore believe in it, and the National Front National will go down, of course. So there's all the rest of what Europe can do with what you call the South. But, albeit, the countries of the South should also seek that. They have to be convinced thereof. If the countries of the South, in the globalization that causes everything that glitters to be gold, and if they say, for example, young students who could be living without friends, there has never been partnership between Morocco and the United States. They have no partnership but with themselves, the United States. In the South, there have to be persons who would say, we want to rebuild something concrete, substantial with Europe, bilaterally, unilaterally, or multilaterally with Europe. Otherwise, of course, a bright future is ahead of us, but I don't think it will work well if we don't really master and control the migratory flows. Mr. Minister, one very last question, and we'll be bringing this session to an end. For starters, I would like to congratulate us and commend us on the very stellar quality of the interventions of Hubert Védrine and André Azoulay. I believe that, based on or in the light of what André said a moment ago, he recalled that Morocco is as it is in its diversity, in its history, in its monarchical system, in the rapports or the relations that exist between all of its components. The same Morocco. Morocco holds no complex. No whatsoever complex. And for this reason and others, in the aftermath of the independence, Morocco has extended its hand to France and to Spain. Let's not lose sight of Spain, too, that has colonized the north of Morocco, but also the Sahara. We have, again, without any complex, extended our hands, and we have in arms, we have managed our independence uncomplexedly. And we have forgotten about the ruptures, and we are able to, and we have shown it, of course, to forget about these ruptures. But, of course, the world has changed today. The world is globalized. Without complex, we are also we are entitled and empowered to extend the hand to China and to the United States. But we know, never forget our geography. And in the geography of ours, there is also the geography, but the history too. Which leads me to say that there is France, and we are really count on maintaining the relations with France. Likewise, with Spain, and with the Spaniards, we keen are holding the same, and we want to be an essential relay, springboard, gateway between Europe and Africa. Essential. Geography is of utmost importance, and at the same time we have the right to enter into dialogue with the rest of the world, just like France and Spain have done it, and they today have the right and are entitled to open onto the whole world if they so wish. So this is the essential. The essential is to be able to manage both the geographic proximity and the globalization, and once again without any complex. Now, since you've started talking about this match, the match, we're very happy. We're very happy. And here again, there is a specificity that the king comes out to the streets clad in the Moroccan national square. Likewise, the Moroccans who've been in. It's formidable, which brings tears to my eyes. But at the same time, what we have won in all this case, sorry, bear with me. is we are, it is a vested right. It is a vested right for Moroccans to be respected by the others. We have the capacity, the ability to catch up on others, to be at par with them, to be at the same level. So that's the most important thing. So no complex whatsoever because of, if not because, thanks to who we are. But at the same time, we are ready, willing, and able to respect everyone and to once again extend our arms and hearts. But at the same time, what we're asking for in this very requirement of ours, demands of ours, we beg respect, we exact respect. And this is why in the very question of our territorial integrity of our country, we have to be respected. Spain and France do know the history and the geography of this region, and this is why they are to be held liable, and they have that responsibility to really show respect on that very question. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, for the very passion, emotion, and for the manifestation of these. And I would like to thank Mr. Vedrine and Azalea for the very well breadth and wealth of their intervention. I'd like to also acknowledge the room for the exchange. Forget not that there is a last session which is going to take place before lunch in this very same room.
Ladies and gentlemen,